I cycled my smart irises to filter the display further until I could make out the physical surface of the moon itself. From the current location of the space station, and also because the tiny moon's orbit was only 6,000 kilometers above Mars, Phobos looked about the same size as Luna did from the surface of the Earth. Although the small Martian moon was as heavily cratered as the familiar moon I'd grown up under, Phobos was misshapen, oblong and lumpy, not the near-perfect spherical shape of Luna. I zoomed into Phobos, attempting to spot details of the military wormhole complex. With the masking effect of my artificial irises, I was just able to make out a cluster of construction which my overlay display indicated was the primary fusion power facility. I then remembered that the military wormhole complex was on Phobos's dark side, or the face of the tidally locked moonlet, which never faced Mars. Also, our current point of view on the Elon 2 station was much lower than the orbit of Phobos. We'd never be able to directly see the wormhole complex from this vantage, no matter the orbital position of either the station or the moon. I continued to inspect the face of Phobos I could see, and noticed that it was slowly receding, visible proof of the space station's lower, faster orbit. Because of our increasing lead in the changing view angle, the glare from the atomic fire lances was growing less severe. We were also only seeing the extreme tips of the lances, as they were also on the face of Phobos further away from the station's current location. I was surprised that the smaller dynamo I'd seen orbiting Vesta had seemed much brighter. I thought the atomic dynamo exhaust would be brighter, I mused out loud. The current output is only 30% of maximum, Omu answered, having quietly entered Hannah's quarters while we were focused on the viewport. Yes, it's much brighter when they are burning at maximum, Hannah added. I knew we had not scheduled any wormholes to the distant arc today, so I was curious about the active power dynamo. What's happening that required firing up only a third of the magnetoplasma dynamic dynamo array? I asked Omu. Praxia and Stellux are using the main Phobos wormhole to send target drones out to the vicinity of the Hemru interloper probe. They will use the departing Hemru probe as an observation station to watch the testing of guided munitions against various targets traveling at fractional light speed. The planned high-speed attack tests. Since the Hemru probe was traveling at 8% of light speed, it was perfect for simulating the velocity of the enemy arc. Also, over the past year, we had sent many sensors, cameras, and even partial AIs to the Hemru probe as we dug into its secrets. Those already deployed assets would act as forward observers for the upcoming weapons tests. The Hellfire flares streaming from the far side of Phobos quickly dwindled and extinguished. I cycled the iris's filters until they were able to detect the residual radiation streaming off into space, a spreading halo of deadliness that luckily was heading away from both our current location on the space station and the surface of the planet itself. Assuming you are both curious, I will now project a current image being relayed in from the Hemru probe site, Omu said. Hannah's wall display came alive to show an empty black starfield. The image panned and zoomed, focusing on a distant ring of a large wormhole terminus portal. The image must be coming from one of the high-power telescope sensors deployed near the Hemru probe. I was about to ask if this was real-time, but realized that it had to have been recorded moments ago before the wormhole had been shut down. A large metallic cylinder emerged from the wormhole terminus. It was big, almost completely filling the 6-meter diameter portal. As I watched it continue extruding from the wormhole, I was also amazed at how long it was. I watched at least 50 meters emerge, and it was still coming. How long is the target drone, Omu? Hannah asked, voicing my curiosity. 78 meters, Hannah. Once the drone carrier has fully emerged and stabilized, it will begin deploying expandable targets. Each target is simply a film of metallized polymer which is spun out to form a circle approximately 400 meters in diameter, Omu explained. The drone carries 4 such targets. We watched the cylinder finish emerging through the wormhole and then fire small thrusters to orientate itself. It had reached a distance of about 1 kilometer from the wormhole when the image winked out. The recording terminated upon the closing of the Phobos wormhole. Live images will resume in approximately 10 minutes when the Sarissa wormhole is again open near the Hemru observation platform to relay data. Omu said. Is that when the testing will begin with our guided munitions? I asked. Yes, these preliminary tests will be using partially modified existing warheads. The goal of these tests is to determine if the existing antimatter stabilization mechanism can survive moderate acceleration loadings. With the enormous costs in both time and energy to produce antimatter, I had to wonder at the wisdom of live tests. Can we spare the antimatter? I mused out loud. Barely. Note that the warheads used today have only partial loadouts of antimatter, just enough to verify the integrity of the containment fields. We will also attempt to recover any antimatter that survives the testing. Hannah and I chatted as we waited until the test began. We were both anxious and nervous. Although the dangerous parts of the test were happening nearly a third of a light year away at the location of the receding Hemru probe, there were still risks just next door at the Phobos installation. The big wormhole would be transferring the fully armed antimatter missiles from the Trojan munitions depot and then sending them on to the Hemru probe site. And while the duration of the transfer was short, an accidental explosion at just the wrong time would be catastrophic for the immediate war effort. Luckily, or maybe intentionally planned for by the AIs, the Elon 2 station would be around the horizon of Mars when the transfer time came. I suddenly remembered that my ex-wife and Ambassador Riho were still on Phobos. Riho, I spoke subvocally after activating my implant's message center. Where are you in Uxa? After a delay of nearly 3 seconds, I heard her response. We are in a secured bunker at the bottom of this moonlet's largest crater, John, the ambassador replied. She must have deduced why I was asking, and that I was worried because she added, Ux assures me that this bunker can withstand any accidental detonation at the wormhole site. The bunker must have been in Stickney Crater, the gigantic impact crater which was the moonlet's most notable feature. The crater's diameter was about half that of the moon itself, and its location was almost directly opposite the wormhole facility's far side location. Riho and I chatted for the next few minutes, with the alien dominating the conversation by relaying her impressions of the wormhole complex. Not only was the Hemru impressed, but I also sensed from her excitement that her outlook on the pending offensive had improved. We are about to activate the fission magnetoplasma dynamic power generators again to begin sending the test munitions through, John, Omu said. I looked to the window but quickly realized that the lower and faster orbit of the space station had indeed taken us too far ahead of Phobos and that it had set behind the curve of Mars. I'd have to settle for watching Hannah's view screen unless I wanted to join the active virtual forum. I knew that Hannah would avoid the virtual forum, so I decided to stay present here and watch it with her. I closed my private chat with Riho after wishing her and Uxe good luck and joined Hannah on her large couch. The display now showed 2 images. One was showing the large wormhole apparatus located on the far side of Phobos. The installation was impressive, partially buried to solidly anchor it firmly in the microgravity of the small moonlet. The other view was focused on a deployed target. The caption on the second view was flashing live, which meant that the Sarissa wormhole must be active to relay the imagery. The target's location was currently holding parallel to the course of the receding probe at a distance of approximately 50,000 kilometers. The powerful telescope showed the target drone clearly, but I noted the stars beyond looked strange. I scanned the data being displayed and noted a number indicating the current Doppler shift factor. There was the answer to the strange-looking image. The relativistic effects of both the drone and the probe's nearly 8% light speed was warping the stars beyond. I remembered something Ux had mentioned about the warhead guidance system. Omu, are the Doppler distortions the main reason we have to run these tests at a similar velocity to the assemblage arc? Yes, John. The star trackers used on the missiles to augment the inertial guidance have to be tested in a similar relativistic state to the arc, Omu replied. 7% of light speed causes enough distortion to be an issue? Even though relativistic effects are slightly less than 5%, the high closure rates of the planned interceptions require that the tests take place in as close to matching conditions of the arc as possible. The Hemru probe's velocity is 0.5% of light speed higher than that of the arc, so we will be sending our munitions through with a proportional increase in speed. How long until the first warheads are sent through to the target drone? I asked. Whether it was coincidence or as a response to my question, a countdown display appeared below the image showing the large Phobos wormhole engine. The display was showing just under 2 minutes. Is Ux in deep interface? I asked out loud. I'm interfaced, John, but only deep enough to monitor the higher-level data feeds, my ex-wife announced via the room speakers. I should be able to communicate freely throughout the tests as all the heavy lifting is being done by Truffles and Praxia. As the countdown dropped below 15 seconds, the massive wormhole machine began energizing. The momentum coils began spinning up the exotic matter far earlier than I had witnessed in the past. This was for 2 reasons. The first was because the amount of matter needing to be accelerated to relativistic speeds in the big wormhole mechanism was far greater than I'd ever witnessed before. The second reason was that the spatial compensation speeds we would be sending the munitions through would be the fastest yet attempted by wormhole. At almost 8.25% of light speed, or 25,732 kilometers per second, the munitions would be traveling approximately 620 kilometers per second faster than the target drone. The delivery wormholes would be formed at a varying distance from the target. The closest would be just over 50,000 kilometers from the target, which would result in a time to intercept of about 80 seconds. During that time, the warhead sensors would have to track and steer the weapon as it took aggressive evasive actions. The small but powerful thrusters installed on each missile had enough capacity for only one decent maneuver, a continuing spiral that hopefully would end with an impact on the target. Our test today was to fine-tune how fast to make the turn, or better put, what maneuvering forces could the warhead's containment system tolerate. The countdown reached 2 seconds, and the Phobos launcher area became very busy. The main 6-meter wormhole was fully energized and opened, causing the imaging sensor to shudder slightly. Simultaneously, a second smaller wormhole formed only meters above the larger aperture. The smaller wormhole was the munitions transfer or shunting wormhole, and it was needed to transport the weapons from the depot out at the Lagrange point to the bigger wormhole. At 0, I barely saw the blur as the small munition missile shot through the gap between the 2 active wormhole apertures. Almost instantly after, both wormholes shut down with the smaller physically pulling back and away from the larger as it closed. The larger wormhole closed with a second visible tremor as the imager dealt with the shock waves from the cycling of enormous power relays located nearby. The rapidity of both the missile transfer and the wormhole shutdowns were to reduce the risk to the Phobos installation if one of the warheads spontaneously detonated. The 2 images on the view screen merged into one single view as the action was now focused out at the edge of the solar system. I noticed that the missile emerged out of the wormhole terminus a second after the Phobos end was shut down. Even with the communications microholes, the data still took time to be relayed to Hannah's wall screen. Missile 1 has safely transitioned through both wormholes and is now orientating itself, Kayombo reported, acting as our guide for the busy AIs overseeing the tests. The warhead is now fully armed, and the unit will begin active maneuvering in 4 seconds. The maximum force experienced by this missile will be approximately 30 gravities. The telescope tracking the missile was able to remain locked as the unit began firing its thrusters. A large red reticle appeared as an overlay to help show the tiny receding blip of light. The blip began to curve wildly. Maximum forces now being experienced. Warhead will pass the target in 5 seconds, Omu explained. I held my breath and waited. Nothing happened as the blip passed by the expanded target drone. Did something go wrong? Hannah looked confused also. No, the missile performed perfectly. As predicted, the warhead containment field tolerated the 30 gravities of acceleration experienced in this test with ease. The missile will now be disarmed and go dormant. In the near future, it will be retrieved via wormhole and the warhead refurbished and restored into inventory, Omu said. I remembered that Omu had mentioned that the antimatter would be saved if possible. Hannah reached over and held my hand. I returned her smile. This is exciting. We are so close to finally being able to attack, she explained. The test continued with another missile being sent through approximately every 4 minutes. Each test saw the warhead exposed to increasing evasive maneuvers. Omu had relayed that the predicted failure point of the existing antimatter suspension mechanism was around 36 gravities. Sure enough, on the fourth test with the missile experiencing just over 35 gravities, there was an incredible flash which caused the telescopic camera to blank out for a moment. "Missile 4 has failed," Omu stated flatly. Its final telemetry indicated that a cascade failure began in the containment system once the warhead was subjected to just over 35.4 gravities. The image recovered, and we could see a rapidly dimming globe of brightness. I noticed that there was no visible expanding shockwave or mushroom cloud like from an atmospheric nuclear test. Next, the image panned back to the deployed target, which was now rippling as it deflected the particle blast from the nearby explosion. An overlay appeared, which highlighted the damage the target disk had taken. The energy release occurred at a sufficient distance so that the target disk remains intact enough to continue to be useful for additional tests. "We will now begin testing the upgraded containment mechanism," Omu stated. Hannah and I chatted and checked messages as we waited. Over the next half hour, we followed 8 more missile tests. The AIs incrementally increased the forces each missile was subjected to until another exploded at just under 84 gravities. We'd reached the limits of the redesigned suspension field. "Will 80 gravities be enough to allow the missiles to reach the Ark?" I asked. Instead of Omu answering, a voice I recognized as that used by Praxia AI spoke up over the room speakers. "Much remains unknown about the actual defensive capabilities of the assemblage Ark, John. From the current data we have of the enemy's technology, the AI Advisory Council estimates that the missiles will require over 200 gravities of maneuvering capability to have a 99% probability of evading interception from any anticipated defenses." This was sobering news. We had a long way to go with our antimatter stabilization methods. Can we build warheads that can withstand that much acceleration? That remains unknown at this time. 3 possible methods are currently under development, although none are far enough along to even estimate when a prototype would be available for testing. "Will we wait, or will we try attacking with the improved warheads which currently exist?" Hannah asked, mostly to me. "The AI Advisory Council has been unable to reach a consensus on that, Miss Crather. I recommend that we proceed using existing warheads. Stellix and Minervus recommend that we delay any attack until the warheads are improved to withstand higher maneuvering forces. Using the existing warheads, can we still attack the Ark from the stern as planned?" I asked. The intent of that was to mislead the assemblage into believing that our first attack was simply another launch from the Hemru system long ago. I preferred this option, especially if chances were high that the attack will fail. "Yes, John. Additionally, I advise that such a stern attack be followed by an attempt using the passive kinetic impactor weapons," Praxia replied. "That method will also be unlikely to be attributed to the Earth. The latter method was the tungsten rods we plan to insert in front of the Ark at near-zero spatial velocity. The enemy would run into them, causing great harm, or be forced to deflect or destroy them. Either way, at the speed the Ark was traveling, they would not be able to scan or retrieve one of the penetrations, and therefore would likely conclude that the penetrators were just random space debris. And even if we missed, we'd learn a great deal about their forward sensors and debris defenses." I thought for only a moment before concluding Praxia's recommendations were sound. "Do you need me to mandate that we continue with both attempts? The attack will be delayed unless you act, or unless something new arises that breaks the current impasse in AI Advisory Council," Praxia stated. It occurred to me why I was now speaking to Praxia directly instead of the information being relayed through Omu. The war AI was stymied at the impasse and sought my direct intervention. "Naomi," I sub-vocalized. As I did so, I realized that I could have just spoken out loud. I did not care if Hannah heard, and also, there were no actual secrets between the AIs. If Naomi wanted privacy, it would simply instruct the subordinate AIs to ignore the data and erase it from their memories. I remain neutral on the subject, John. While attacking now would potentially end the threat of the assemblage earlier, delaying would allow for potentially new and safer methods and technologies to be developed. The risks to your person balance out either way. Therefore, the decision on whether to press on with our attack plans remains yours. I had already realized that delaying would be to our benefit as far as the prospects of continued amazing technological developments. As we'd already demonstrated with our development of wormhole technology, the paired intellectual capability between our AIs and our smarter humans was remarkable. From what we had learned from Pickett, it was likely that the assemblage lacked any such potential. Having been in flight for millennia, our conclusions were that our enemy was seriously short on resources, both energy and operational intellectual capacity. Of course, this was just speculation, but it was logical to assume as much. "Have you modeled the current will of humanity regarding the issue?" I replied, this time out loud. "Yes, John," Naomi answered, also vocally. "Current projections are that 48% would choose to proceed with attacking the assemblage as soon as possible. The remainder would prefer to wait, with the duration of the delay ranging from weeks to decades." At first, Hannah looked confused at Naomi's statement coming out of the blue, but she quickly parsed its meaning. I noticed her expression change as her confusion switched to anger at any possible delays, and held up my hand to forestall her pending outburst. "We will proceed with the original plan of launching an attack on the enemy arc from the rear using our current missiles. I still believe that the assemblage is critically short on resources, and even if the attack fails, we will learn much of their defenses and will have time to change our tactics. My hunch is that the risks versus rewards are still well in our favor." "Of course, John," Naomi replied in a matter-of-fact manner, as if the matter was trivial. Hannah seemed to calm, but clearly still had questions over the ongoing conversation. "Thank you, John." Praxia AI's voice spoke next. 8 original design warhead munitions, which have been held in reserve at the Lagrange Arsenal, will now be readied for wormhole delivery to the assemblage, as soon as energy reserves at Phobos and Vesta allow. Current estimates place the optimal commencement for the attack at just under 2 Martian days from now. Again, that the war AI presented the data itself rather than relay the data through Omu or Naomi was telling. It almost seemed eager for the bloodshed to begin, and I was not sure if I should be worried. Still, I felt excited that we would be ready to launch our first attack in 2 Martian days. Hannah raised her eyes at the news. "Did I just miss something?" I shook my head. "Not really. We just clarified our thinking on the original attack plan. Last-minute jitters and all that." In a timely change of subject, Omu reported that all was ready in my own quarters. Hannah rose with me as I told her I would see her later tonight after I freshened up. When I opened the apartment entry door to leave, a young boy who looked 3 or maybe 4 came running in. He skidded to a stop, giving me and Omu a questioning look before beaming when he spied Hannah still standing by the couch. "Nana, Hannah," the youngster said as he ran into the arms of the now kneeling Hannah. "Oh, Bastion, Nana missed you. How have you been?" Hannah cooed as they hugged. "Nana, Hannah?" I whispered to Omu. The android just smiled. I also smiled as I watched the previously warrior mode Hannah transformed into the mothering mode I was familiar with from when she helped me raise my daughter, Larissa Daring. "Bastion, you should not just run into someone else's quarters, even if it's Nana Hannah's," a young woman called out. The newly arrived person was standing just inside the open doorway, and she smiled nervously at Omu and me before looking sternly at the young lad. "I'm sorry, Mama, but it's been almost a week, oh." The young fellow, Bastion, said. "John," Hannah said, standing again while still holding Bastion on her hip. The pose screamed grandmotherly, and I smiled even more. "This is Bastion Williams Pompous and his mother, Wilma. They live over on Elon's other arm, so we don't get to see each other nearly enough." "I get to spend the night," Bastion said excitedly. "Only if you're polite, young man," Wilma said. She then turned to me. "Hello, John Prime. I see you finally come to Mars. Word on the station is that your arrival portends that the war is about to start?" She'd said the last as a question, and I nodded as I approached and shook her hand. "Very soon. Nice to meet you." "Have we met before?" I asked. "Yes, about 30 years ago. I was a preteen male at the time and going by the name William, although I was probably introduced you as Billy." At my blank look, Hannah spoke up. "Billy is one of my rearlings, John. I brought him along once 3 decades ago when I went to see Larissa. You happened to be visiting your daughter also at the time." I thought I remembered. While Hannah had gestated and delivered hundreds of babies over the centuries in her role as a midwomb, rearlings, children she was commissioned to help raise to maturity, were far fewer. "I think I remember you now, Billy, Wilma." "Sorry," I apologized while quickly glancing at Bastion. The lad hadn't noticed my slip. Wilma brushed the gaff aside. Billy's fine. I've kept the nickname for use with my friends. Also, Bastion is fully aware that I gen switched to have him. Yeah, but I need to learn to be more circumspect. Some parents don't want their kids to know such details until they are older. I've never bought into that mentality, she replied. Although I do believe in not permitting children to swap genders until they've reached base maturity. We chatted for a bit longer with Hannah, mostly entertaining Bastion while I got to know Wilma. She asked me a few questions about myself, but most were about Riho. I was used to not being the center of attention now and answered as best I could. I was smart enough to invite both her and the young boy to visit when the alien ambassador finally arrived. I knew Riho would tolerate her questions well and would truly enjoy spending time with the youngster. I learned that Wilma was an engineer with a vacuum construction specialty. She was working with the group designing and building the Phobos and Deimos launching tethers. The longer Deimos tether was already under construction on that outer Martian moon, while the shorter Phobos project was delayed due to the war effort. When both tethers were completed, it would reduce the energy needed to launch heavy cargoes from the Martian surface towards destinations as far as Jupiter. Similarly, incoming cargoes could be decelerated into a lower Martian orbit or even dropped to the surface without having to shed as much delta V via friction in the thin atmosphere. The system would improve efficiency so much that it had maintained its priority even with wormhole technology. In fact, I learned from Wilma that the orbital range wormholes had accelerated construction of the project, allowing her to spend more time with her son and less on orbital travel than would have been possible previously. A half hour later, fresh from a shower and wearing freshly printed station pajamas, I called my son Ben. We planned our meeting tomorrow, and he informed me that he had a surprise for me. After our virtual terminated, I was polite enough to not spoil Ben's surprise by asking Naomi what it was. After that, I fell asleep with the aid of my implant. With the recent business on Vesta, I had a serious case of jet lag, and 4 hours of imposed REM sleep was just what the doctor ordered. 51 hours later, I was hosting a war party in my new station quarters. My guests were a mixture of family and friends. Omu was in attendance, of course, and I counted my android companion as family. Although we'd been together so long, she was in a category of her own. My son Alec and my grandson Ben were in attendance and were also clearly family. Next was Ukes and Hannah, who were arguably closer to family than friend. My friends in attendance were Ambassador Riho and Adele Sol Chilean. Lastly, rounding out the guest list was Deja, Ben's surprise and current life partner. Ben had introduced me to Deja yesterday. I was still making up my mind. Adele's presence was also a surprise. She'd been with Ben and Deja when they'd arrived on the Elon 2 station via shuttle for our meeting. Apparently, she'd arrived in Mars space via wormhole 3 days earlier, while I'd still been on Vesta. She had come to document the beginnings of our retaliation, as seen from my perspective. She was able to split her duties between friendship and a media representative, and kept the latter functions very unobtrusive. I had yet to classify Ben's partner Deja Neothoris as a friend. Deja was true Martian royalty, and she certainly acted like it. The popular Martian Congress had elected her to fill the role of Princess of Mars just 3 years earlier. Until Ben had introduced us, I had been unaware that they had become partners. As a lifelong Mars resident, including having been born here, Deja's shell was tall and slender. Along with her natural beauty, which had undoubtedly helped her win her title as princess, her Martian lung augments provided an optimal display pedestal for her impressive breasts. She was topless, as was fashionable on Mars, and I had to actively work to keep from staring at the display, especially after I noticed Riho frowning at my repeated slips. As I said, I was still trying to place the status of the princess. From Deja's frosty demeanor, I was leaning towards the not a friend, even possible enemy side of the guest list. From what I could gather from her passive-aggressive comments when we'd spoken earlier, the princess blamed me personally for the damage the war effort was causing to the fragile Martian ecology. The massive increase in strip mining and other resource extraction methods, combined with the idling of the terraforming efforts, had been very unpopular with the Martian population, especially the local-born PMC contingent. I could have argued that our efforts would see the war over quickly, but I was unwilling to make such a boastful claim. The truth was, no one knew how long the war and its impact on Mars would last. It was also possible that even after the war ended, with wormholes proving so beneficial, we might need the increased fuel mining activity on Mars to continue. The energy-intensive technology required the Martian fission fuel, and this would continue until alternatives were found. So with those facts in mind, I took the princess's verbal abuse stoically and simply apologized. She'd either learn to deal with it or not, and frankly, there were bigger issues than the emotions of Ben's current paramour to worry about right now. Well, everything is set, my ex-wife said, having just emerged from virtual, where she had been overseeing the preparations for our first offensive attack. 8 of the original design warheads are loaded into the Arsenal's outgoing wormhole queue, and the Phobos complex is ready to send them on to the Ark. The 8 warheads would be sent as 4 salvos from 4 separate locations and distances behind the enemy Ark. We'd selected distances ranging from 1 to 3 light seconds, which translated to 300,000 to 900,000 kilometers. The variations were to better assess the detection capabilities of the enemy. "What will the closure rates be?" Adele asked from her elevated stool, which she had placed near the back of the room. 250 kilometers per second for the closer insertions. The insertions at 700,000 and 900,000 kilometers will be sent at 300 kilometers per second, Ux explained. I attempted to do the math in my head, but Riho beat me to it. Those rates will mean a flight duration of 20 minutes for the closest insertion and 50 minutes for the farthest. Will the insertions be timed so as to result in all weapons reaching the target simultaneously? That I could answer, as we'd wargamed this initial attack long ago. No, the warheads will arrive slightly staggered, I replied. We want to insert them as close to simultaneously as possible, so that the enemy does not have time to bring additional scanners and long-range telescopes into play and possibly spot one emerging from the wormhole. We will also be using the Sarissa wormhole to insert stealth probes to more closely observe our attack and the enemy's response, Ux added. Sarissa will also directly image the attacks from a much greater distance. The view screen lit up, and everyone who was not already seated near the screen gathered and took an empty seat. There were multiple views. One smaller window showed the large Phobos wormhole mechanism. Another window showed the smaller Arsenal wormhole floating in space with the 8 readied missiles arranged in a long injector extending outward from the toroidal ring. Dozens of space-capable mobile units flitted around the Arsenal wormhole machinery using small thruster jets. The largest section of the view screen showed a simplified 2-dimensional map display. A large indicator on the left side of the map was simply labeled Ark. On the right half of the map were 4 equally spaced indications, each topped with a timer counting down. The 4 points were obviously the planned wormhole terminus launching points, with the countdowns indicating the time until weapons launch. The soonest to be sent through was labeled Target Point 4. It was also the launching point located furthest from the enemy, and its label indicated the distance to target as 900,000 kilometers. The timer had just dropped below 3 minutes. I suddenly wished I had gone to the bathroom room. The next inward target point, number 3, was showing just under 6 minutes until its warhead would launch. Point 3's distance was approximately 700,000 kilometers. Target Point 2, at 500,000 kilometers distance from the Ark, was just under 9 minutes to launch. Last, Point 1, at 300,000 kilometers, showed under 12 minutes till its warhead was sent through. I had already forgotten the flight times for each warhead that Riho had reported. I could have used my implant to recall the data, but I suspected I was not the only one who needed the reminder. Can we see the expected impact times for each salvo of warheads, assuming they all make it that far? I asked. New countdowns appeared below each of the 4 terminus point indications. Point number 4, the most distant but soonest to launch, indicated that its 2 missiles would reach the enemy in just over 52 minutes. Point 3 indicated just under 45 minutes. Point 2 indicated 42 minutes, and point number 1, closest to the Ark, would see its missiles impact in just 32 minutes. I was confused about the nonlinear variations in the delays until I remembered that Ux had said that the outer 2 wormholes would be sending their warheads through at the faster closure rate of 300 kilometers per second as compared to 250 kilometers per second for points number 1 and 2. Half an hour! We have to wait over 30 minutes until the first missile hits, Princess Deja Neothoris whined. The rest of us managed to keep our reactions to the princess's outburst to ourselves, but I did catch Ben frown. He reached over and patted her knee soothingly. She'd been grumpy ever since she'd arrived. From the careful way she moved, I suspected a large part of her distress was the higher simulated gravity of the station. All Martian-born humans were supposed to exercise their shells in high-gravity facilities on the surface regularly, and despite having an augment to do the chore, being human meant that they oftentimes do not put in the requisite time. Ben seemed to be suffering in the simulated Earth gravity also, and must have been slacking. As he was aiming for a directorship, he should know better, as the executives needed to travel often and were required to be adaptive to all expected conditions. Princess Deja ignored Ben's placating gestures. "Well, I have better things I can do in the meantime," she muttered as her shell took on the placid look of someone who had fled into virtual. I managed to avoid uttering out loud the good riddance I felt, but I must have revealed enough of an expression for Ben to deduce my true feelings. He shrugged, clearly embarrassed, but I waved the matter away. I was not sure of the princess's subjective age, but I'd bet half my scut that she had not yet reached her third true decade. Let Ben deal with her immaturity if he wanted that hassle. Still, I could not help but think of Sahun Shalud, Ben's first long-term partner, and Serenity's mother. Sahun had far more maturity and class than Ben's current royal pain in the ass, with Ben serving public duty on Mars in order to get his directorship. How did he have time to deal with a spoiled... Of course! I suddenly understood why Ben was putting up with the princess. She was a royal. Ben was hoping for the political boost Deja would bring among the PMC when he ran for director. I almost snorted as I realized the gamble he was taking. Riho diffused the awkwardness by engaging Ux with questions about the wormhole precautions which had been undertaken on Phobos. Hannah and Alex started talking tactics and drew in Ben, leaving me momentarily alone. With 2 minutes yet remaining until the first wormhole attempt, I headed to the bar as a stiff whiskey sounded good just then. Adele noticed my actions and gestured for me to bring her a glass. She winked when I handed her 3 fingers of Mars's best single malt. "Ben has certainly gotten himself hooked into a feisty one, hasn't he?" she whispered. Declining to comment, I just smiled and raised my eyebrows, ceding her point. I raised my glass to change the subject. "Here's to luck with the offensive." "Which one?" she muttered, looking from my grandson and his princess back to the attack view screen. "Good one," I whispered as we touched glasses and drank. That's smooth," she exclaimed quietly, after letting a good swallow relight her pilot. I felt the warming sensation travel down my own gullet to settle into my belly. "Yes, it is," I replied with a sigh. Ben brought up a few bottles from the surface. The barley used to distill it was greenhouse grown. A glare suddenly showed through the apartment's exterior window as Phobos and the fully active atomic dynamo rose over the curve of Mars ahead of us. The window filters kicked in, diming the light show. The station's lower and faster orbit would see us pass the glare soon enough, but the distraction was still enough to bring all conversations to a close and remind everyone that the first wormhole activation was near. Adele left her imager on her stool and joined me as I returned to the seating area by the view screen. The countdown for the 4th target point activation was at 16 seconds. The window showing the Arsenal wormhole was busy with activity. The smaller shunting wormhole was now fully active, and the warhead dispenser was moving into its final position directly over the shimmering aperture. The other window showed activity at the big Phobos wormhole. The image shuddered slightly each time an additional power relay was closed, dumping even more power into the exotic matter spinning at near light speed in the wormhole's outer velocity compensation coils. Though the test series a few days ago set the record for the fastest spatial velocity transfer yet achieved, today's exercise was still very close. In order to send the warheads through with the desired closure speeds of 300 km/s, the Phobos machinery would need to compensate for a spatial velocity difference of over 22,800 kilometers per second. Or to put it another way, almost exactly 7.5% of light speed. Adding to the complexity, the multi-light-year distance to the target combined with the non-trivial mass of the missiles meant that this was one of the most energy-intensive transfers yet attempted. Eux had faith in her models and had reported that everything would be fine. The countdown reached 0 and the big wormhole activated, punching a 6-meter diameter tunnel 8.096 light-years across space. The dispenser machinery at the arsenal activated simultaneously and disgorged the first of 2 8-meter-long and surprisingly boxy antimatter missiles. I quickly looked back to the display window showing Phobos and caught the weapon as it exited the shunting wormhole and entered the adjacent aperture of the main wormhole. With the launch successful, indicator number 4 on the main map display turned green and began slowly pulsating. Seconds later, the process was repeated as the second warhead was sent through. This was followed by the shunting wormhole quickly terminating in order to again isolate the still dangerous weapons arsenal from Phobos. I expected the big Phobos wormhole to also immediately shut down, but it stayed open. Instead, the window showed a sensory stalk being poked through the active portal. Uxa caught my confused look and explained, "We need to send a tracking sensor through the wormhole to help fix the missile trajectories. The sensor head includes a star tracker and a rangefinder telescope to pinpoint the enemy arc. Once the needed data is collected, final guidance instructions will be passed to both missiles using a tight beam message laser." The bottom timer had now reached 48 minutes. This was the first missile's expected time of arrival at the arc. A new window replaced the view of the arsenal, and I recognized the small and blurry shape of the enemy arc as seen from a great distance. It was clearly a live view from the sensor's telescope. "We've spotted the enemy," Ux said excitedly. "Distance to target is verified at 896,400 kilometers, well within the 2% margin of error for missile guidance. Final correction data is now being passed to both missiles via message laser." The view in the new window now showed 2 small, boxy objects. Almost immediately, a visible glow appeared from each, and they began to move differently against the background starfield. These must be the 2 missiles we just sent through. Both missiles acknowledge reception of the final targeting data and are now adjusting course. Also, both report that their warheads are fully enabled with the antimatter containment fields fully functional, Ux reported. The view of the rapidly dwindling missiles winked out just as she finished her statement. The window showing the big wormhole on Phobos showed that the shimmering portal was now closed. We'd done it. The first pair of missiles were on their way, and better yet, we'd managed to not blow up the precious wormhole mechanisms in the process. I studied the data on target point number 3 and saw that the next deployment was only a few minutes away. The Phobos window showed that the spatial compensation coils on the big wormhole were still energized and spinning. Apparently, it used less energy overall if they were kept idling, so to speak, between consecutive short delay wormholes which shared similar distance and velocity parameters. The reduced glare coming through the exterior porthole brightened slightly as more energy dynamo units on Phobos were brought online. The first missile deployment had utilized mostly stored ESU energy, but as we did not want to deplete those reserves too quickly, the next wormhole would require additional generated power. "Well, we have officially declared war on the assemblage," Alex said. "No, we finally started fighting back on a war they declared a long, long time ago," Hannah replied. "I agree with Hannah," I added. "This counterattack has been a long time in the making." Ben was neutral while Riho was nodding. "I hope your attack will yield better results than that launch from my homeworld millennia ago," the alien said. There was a moment of silence as we all considered the Hemru statement. They had also survived to later attack their enemy, but their counterattack had been well after the arc had passed, and their homeworld had begun its recovery. Also, with their attack being a long stern chase, so to speak, with their weapons crossing hundreds of light years while slowly catching up with the receding enemy. "Riho, it just occurred to me that we will be able to watch the results of our attack almost instantly. Your homeworld didn't have that luxury. In fact, they won't even see the explosions from their attack for many more centuries," I said. "That is true, Jon," she replied. "However, I expect they will learn the results of their attack well before then." "What do you mean?" Ben asked her. "She means that the Hemru will most likely learn the results of their attack from us humans when we visit their world," Alec explained. Yes, with the pace of your technological innovation, that will likely occur soon, the ambassador replied. Well, there is a chance the Hemru could develop the technology to meet us here first though, right? Ben asked contemplatively. That is unlikely. Though the Hemru have AIs, we do not, well, at the time I was sent, did not utilize AIs to the same extent that humans do. We are far more cautious with their use and development, Riho said quietly. Do you think humanity is being careless? Alec asked. She hesitated before speaking. At first I thought that, but it is difficult to argue with the achievements the human and AI symbiosis has made. I remain skeptical, but optimistic. I am also comforted by the knowledge that the AIs in existence in human space are constructed around the base Hemru control algorithms transmitted here millennia ago. These algorithms have long proven successful in controlling uncontained AI replication. Riho met my gaze as she finished her statement. I waited for the other shoe to drop, but she did not continue. While Ux knew that Omu and Naomi existed without the Hemru control algorithms, I wasn't sure if any of the rest were aware of that detail. I was glad that the ambassador had not pointed out those two exceptions. The countdown for the second deployment was now below 30 seconds, and everyone again focused on the big display. I spared a moment to take in the room. Adele had retreated to capture the scene with her imager. Her closed mouth was moving, which meant that she was likely making subvocal notes. She winked at me when I looked at her camera. Omu was kneeling near my couch with her head bowed as if in her offline mode. She was monitoring everything digitally, of course, and this was confirmed from the way she digitally smiled as I studied her. Of course, the room imager feed was included in the data she was tracking. I next looked to Ben and Deja. The princess was still off somewhere virtual, and Ben still looked slightly miffed. He caught that I was watching and quickly composed himself. She's monitoring the action from the Martian public forum. It's sort of her duty as royalty, he explained almost sheepishly. Also, she really hates enduring the full Earth gravity of the station. I just nodded and looked back to the screen, not quite managing to hide a small smile. Yes, Ben will certainly have his hands full riding that merry-go-round. As the countdown dropped below 10 seconds, I focused my attention on the activity at the Arsenal wormhole. Now knowing where to look, I was able to observe each missile as it was prepped for launch. Mobile units were busy disconnecting the final power and control cables from each boxy device. It struck me how un-missile-like the weapons were. Instead of the traditional streamlined nose cone atop a long tubular body with fins, each looked more like a box kite filled with gadgetry, with a large beach ball stuck in the middle. Of course, the central ball was the antimatter containment unit. The boxy ends were the guidance and thruster compartments. Being utilized solely in the vacuum of space, there was no need for streamlining. I had a sudden and disquieting thought. Do you suppose Naomi had prepared a few of these weapons with the traditional streamlined casing? Maybe for possible use in an atmosphere, maybe like the Earth. Did the shunting wormhole here at the Mars Arsenal have the range to send weapons all the way to Earth no matter its current orbital location? I then realized that if the local wormhole did have that capacity, then streamlining would not be needed as the weapon could be made to appear instantly anywhere on the planet. Just zip, bang, and no earthly target. It then struck me, why was I worrying about such a morbid possibility? Maybe it was the doubts about AIs that Riho had just expressed. I shook the thought out of my head and got back to the countdown. The shunting wormhole activated, and the second salvo of missiles was sent to Phobos for long-range transmission to the vicinity of the Ark. I checked the map display, and the identifier for the third staging point turned green. The missiles were successfully out of the solar system and on their way to the Ark. The size of our attack had just doubled. Soon it would double again. The timer showing when the missiles from this newest launch would reach the enemy Ark was at 42 minutes. The first pair was still 49 minutes out, so the newer pair would strike 7 minutes earlier. The pace of our attack was accelerating. Again, the big wormhole stayed open long enough for the sensor stalk to verify ranges and bearings. Missiles 3 and 4 received the corrections and reported they were both fully operational and the sensor was withdrawn. I looked to the countdown for target point 2 and saw that it was at 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Sure enough, the window to the arsenal was displaying mobile units busy preparing the next 2 missiles. Omu rose from her kneeling, idle stance and approached the group. John, you have just concluded your pre-recorded speech at the Global Public Forum. It was received very well, the android reported. What's this? Alec asked, confusion written on his face. I wanted to watch the start of the war in private and not as a display piece for the public forum. So I recorded my speech and had Omu deliver it in my image and voice. Ben looked scandalized while Alec just snorted and shook his head. Ooks, Hannah, and Riho just nodded. I did not look at Adele as she had worked with me on the speech earlier in virtual. At least tell me you will go speak if our attack succeeds and we win tonight? Ben asked. I just looked back at him with a smirk. Tell me you didn't, my grandson sputtered. Okay. I won't tell you about that or the other 3 scenarios I pre-recorded messages about, I retorted. He frowned, but I went on before he could object. Look, Ben, I'm not gunning for a directorship like you. Just the opposite. I want to drop off the public radar, I explained. At least I bothered to record a few messages. I could have just avoided the forum altogether. The countdown at the second target point ticked down to 0, and we all focused on the view screen as another pair of missiles was sent through. Again, the sensor stalk verified the range and bearing and passed the corrections onto the missiles. They reported all was well and the big wormhole was terminated. In a few minutes, the final pair would be sent through. Before we could begin chatting again, a new window opened with a caption that said, Sarissa. The wormhole machinery was already active with the spatial compensation coils already charged. A long injector was moving into position directly above the still-closed portal. The injector reminded me of the device we'd used to send probes to the Hemru interloper probe. The spotter probes? I asked. Yes, Omu said. 3 stealth microprobes are being inserted into parallel trajectories with the arc at distances of approximately 16,000 kilometers. The wormhole formed, and almost instantly the injector launched a small, matte black probe. A blue indicator appeared on the main map display off to the side of the arc. This must be the location our spotter microprobe had just arrived at. Sarissa will now reposition its terminus point for the second probe insertion, Omu explained next. This happened quickly as only a few seconds later, a second probe was launched. Correspondingly, a second blue indication appeared on the opposite side of the arc. Omu remained silent as the third probe was sent through, and a third blue indication appeared on the map. The wormhole was terminated, and the window showing Sarissa extinguished. All 3 microprobes are now in position, Omu reported. Approximately 40 minutes after the final missile is due to impact the arc, the wormhole will be used to retrieve the probes. What if the spotter probes are noticed by the assemblage in the meantime? Hannah asked. Ooks had assisted in the design of the microprobes and answered, even if the enemy spots 1 or more of the probes, it is doubtful that they will have time to retrieve one before they are picked up. Also, the probes will self-destruct if they sense that they are about to be captured. But if they are spotted, won't the assemblage be watching? Won't they see Sarissa retrieve them and learn about our wormhole ability? Ben asked. That remains a constant risk. However, Sarissa's small portal size and its ability to reposition rapidly will reduce the threat. Also, we estimate that any sensors remaining on the arc will be busy looking for additional incoming missiles, Ux explained. Everyone nodded at the logic of that. No one spoke the faint hope that the arc would be too damaged to respond, as we'd all heard the AI's estimates of success for this first strike. Sarissa will now suspend and recharge its energy reserves, Omu reported as that window closed. It will become active again to directly surveil the enemy approximately 40 seconds before the first pair of missiles arrives on target. The windows showing Phobos in the Arsenal wormhole activated, and we watched the countdown for the final pair of missiles. 20 seconds later, they had been successfully launched, their courses corrected, and the big wormhole shut down. The wall screen now only showed the main map display. To the left was the enemy arc with its 3 new watching microprobes. To the right were the slowly lengthening tracks of the 8 incoming missiles. Below each track was a large display showing the distance to the arc and the remaining time until arrival. The first and closest pair would impact in 23 minutes. The next 2 pairs would arrive in 33 and 36 minutes, respectively. The last pair would close out the attack in 43 minutes. We were committed now. Even if we had wanted to abort, there was no way to recall the armed missiles without them detonating. I looked around at the others and saw a mixture of excitement and worry. It was as if no one dared to speak their thoughts. "Just enough time for all of us to use the bathroom before the show starts," I said to break the mood. I was not the only one who did just that.